Hello, my name is Shannon Houghton, and I'm a second and third grade teacher in Federal Way, Washington. I wanted to take the time today to just take you around my classroom library, show you some of the systems that I've put in place, and show you how my library has expanded over the years. First, I'm going to take you to a couple of fiction bookshelves that I started out with my very first year teaching, so you can kind of see from a smaller scale where I started. Right over this way. This set of double bookshelves is where I started my classroom library, and originally I had both my fiction and my nonfiction together. I have them sorted by different genres, and I started with some series that I knew I'd have a lot of. I have Boxcar Children, Magic Treehouse, Jeannie B. Jones. Then I went by just different categories and groups of books. So I have Toughing It Out, which is challenges at home and school. I have Curious Readers Want to Know, which is where I started putting my nonfiction books that I didn't know where they could go. A Royal Life, princesses and things, school stories, silly stuff. And you can see I have the books are mostly in these Sterilite buckets that I adore, that I used to get from Target. Now they are available at Walmart or online. My picture books don't fit in there, so my students know if they're looking for school stories, which is bucket number 7, they notice that the chapter books are in the 2 buckets, and then the picture books that go along with school stories will be right next to it. So this is what I had originally in my library, and then as I grew, and for example, I had way too many thrilling adventures and way too many animal chapter books, I started expanding, and I'll show you where I expanded to over to the left. As my collection of fiction and nonfiction grew larger, I was able to subdivide my book boxes into more and more specific series. So I found that I had way too many picture books, so I just started a category of good picture books. I have more series like the Bailey Street Kids. I have 2 buckets of historical fiction with more picture books right next to them. I was even able to get as specific as I have 3 buckets full of dog stories. Apparently that's really popular with my kids. And then I have the I Can Read books. I have the I Can Read books separately because I know there's often a debate between do you sort books by level or by genre. Putting all the I Can Read books together was my way of saying, hey, if you know that you're having a little bit of trouble reading, you can go to these books and find books that are at your level, but you don't have to feel stigmatized about it. There's a couple more shelves of fiction that I want to show you as well. I try to keep my books at a variety of different heights, but I know that not everybody is close to 6 feet tall like I am, so I try to keep them on as low of shelves as I can feasibly manage. Here I have just more series books, Sweet Valley Twins, Babysitter Club, Nancy Drew, Encyclopedia Brown, and I also have our whiteboards stored down here. These are 2 Target bookshelves pushed back to back, and then I have 2 students on either side. I intentionally put students over here because I know I have some kids who like working more independently but don't want to feel ostracized from the rest of the group, so this seemed like a good way to still keep them in the loop. I mentioned earlier that a lot of my books started out in more general tubs and then went more and more specific. Thrilling Adventure was one of those. So thrilling adventure books subdivided out into adventure and then fantasy. Fantasy got to be too much, so now I have extra buckets of fantasy series. I now have science fiction series that I pulled out of there. And now I even had so many of those that I just recently added a book box in here that has books with multiple copies that friends can share. I just keep adding on book boxes from number 1 all the way up to, I'm in the 70s right now, and I'll tell you a little bit later what I do with my nonfiction boxes. This is my last section of fiction for now. I had originally, the OCD part of me was really worried about book boxes like the Caldecott medal. So for example, I knew that this book box was always going to need to be on a top shelf because it was so large. And I was worried, well, what happens if I move around my bookshelves and this is no longer on the top? I decided that just for me it was a choice that my Caldecotts were going to be a book that even if it went out of order, I would just tell my kids about it ahead of time. So I have bucket 54, 55, Caldecott medals are 56, and then 57. Another similar situation I ran into is we have a yearly Battle of the Books competition, and I like to keep the Battle of the Books titles really easy to access in all one place. So these books actually don't have a number on them. They just say BOB for Battle of the Books. And then when they are done, for example, this book is going to go into our Andrew Clements author study box, or else bucket 7, the school stories box. So I'll just put a new sticker over that one. You'll also notice that on some of these shelves, I found it was easier, especially if I had a lot of paperback, just regular sized books. I switched to the clear Sterilite containers, also from Target. Again, that's just because I was able to fit more on each shelf. My fiction keeps going until it ends right about here with our man versus nature adventure stories, another further subdivision I had to come up with. You might be wondering how in the world my kids are able to find anything in the library. And for the fiction section, one of the first things that my students put in their readers' notebooks is a catalog of all the fiction book boxes we have. A list like this is really useful when my students are trying to find books. It's also helpful for me when I'm trying to add books to our classroom library, which I oftentimes do at home. I really encourage my students to either circle, highlight, put stars by whatever series they're interested in reading or books that they're interested in trying out next. On the other side of their inside cover of their reading notebook, they have the nonfiction book boxes that are available to them. And in our classroom, our nonfiction book boxes have for the past couple of years been organized using the Dewey Decimal System. So if my kids know that they like outer space, if they check out a book in our class library, they know they're going to find it in bucket 520. So they know that when they go to the school library or the city or county library, that they'll also find outer space books in 520. I mentioned before that I'm a little bit OCD about my library, as you can kind of tell. But there's one section that I had to kind of just let go and get over it. And that was in my animals nonfiction. There are so many animal books, and they're so large because so many of them are picture books, that I really had to keep them all kind of in the same area, even though they're in the 590s in the Dewey Decimal System, so they didn't really fit in numbering-wise. I actually asked our fabulous custodial staff to take the drawers, or the doors off of these cupboards, so that I was able to use them both for storage, it's my secret hidden behind, and also for book boxes. So I started out with animals, nonfiction, 590, and then just like with my fiction, once I had a critical mass of books, I subdivided them out into insects, birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. I also have a whole section just in general of all my oversized books. I found that this corner particularly is a really nice place where a lot of my reluctant readers just kind of gravitate towards. And I figured if I put kind of these high interest, big, giant books down here, they might be more interested in checking them out. There's one more section of nonfiction left, and then I'll show you kind of my projects that are in progress. For now, the rest of my nonfiction is hanging out over here. I have math, outer space, physical science. I actually stored poetry in nonfiction because I wanted students to be able to actually find poetry in a real library. It's kind of, we talk about how it's kind of counterintuitive that, you know, not all poetry is nonfiction, but why is it still stored there? That's kind of a conversation we also had with fairy tales, myths, and legends, because students wondered, you know, why is that technically a nonfiction if we know that some of those stories are made up? So those are a lot of really good conversations that have just been sparked by our classroom library. As you can see, there's a little bit of space left over here where if I remove my hidden secret storage of supplies, I'll be able to fit books as we expand further. And that is about it. I'm going to show you two more small pieces that I'm working on so you can see what I do with books as I receive new ones and if I'm not able to handle them right away. So, I can tend to be a piling person, so I like having one central place where all my new books are going to go, because I'm not able to take care of them right when I need to. So for right now, this is kind of my author's study corner, where I have buckets for Beverly Cleary, Patricia Riley Giff, Louis Sachar, and then I have books that really still need to be processed. If you're interested in more about how I sort my classroom library, there's a link below this video that you can click on to find out more about how I do the actual processing of my books in my library. This is my secret shelf of stuff. I have this normally covered up with a piece of fabric so that you can't see the disaster under here, but I just wanted to include this in the video so that you could see that things aren't always perfect, things aren't always clean and neat and tidy, and that's okay, because eventually these books are going to get out on the shelves into the hands of kids where they will be able to enjoy them. Thank you so much for joining me on this tour, and make sure you check out our other videos and our class website. Thanks so much.